The 2025 season for the Pittsburgh Pirates is one of the most important we've seen in a very long time. And success is paramount for this team, but who are the most important players for team success?
You are Locked On Pirates, your daily Pittsburgh Pirates podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Locked On Pirates podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network. My name is Ethan Smith. You can find me on Twitter at MVP_Ethan or at Locked On Pirates for all of your news, analysis, opinions, and reactions to everything going on in the world of the Pittsburgh Pirates from a lifelong fan to lifelong fans just like you. Today's episode of Locked On Pirates is brought to you by Game Time. Make sure you download the Game Time app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase of tickets to a comedy show, a sports event, a theater event, or anything else that's on Game Time. Just make sure to go use the code LOCKEDONMLB and tell them that Ethan Smith of Locked On Pirates sent you. And today's show is very indicative of what I think you're going to see on this show throughout the entirety of the 2025 campaign, because we're going to start this show and really the entirety of the show talking about players that are the most important for this team to succeed in 2025. Because as you heard at the top, I really do consider 2025 one of the most important seasons that we've seen from the Pittsburgh Pirates in quite some time. Because with the current regime in place, that being Derek Shelton and Ben Cherington, of course, Cherington being the general manager and Derek Shelton being the manager of the club, you have to start wondering, when does this finally turn around? Because these guys have been here since 2020. There's been nothing but losing seasons since they have arrived. And the last two seasons in particular have been probably the most frustrating because of the fact that they just did not take a step forward in the win column from 2024 to 2023. And I've been on record on this show as saying, if they do not at least get to the 80 or 84 win mark this year, that those guys will be gone. But all of this is going to hinge on what happens on the field. And that's what there is some beauty to this, because it doesn't really have anything to do with how much the team is spending or where all the other assets are and stuff like that. They have the assets in place to be a good baseball team. They just need to see some guys take steps forward. They need some guys to stay at the mountaintop that they've been on, and they need some other guys to just step up outright, period. And I want to start with the group that really struggled the most last season, which was the bullpen. And the bullpen this year, not much has happened so far as getting anybody to really solidify this bullpen and make it that top-end unit that we were all hoping we would see last season. They did acquire Caleb Ferguson in free agency a couple of weeks ago. There does appear to be a possibility that Caleb Ferguson could be a starter moving forward for this Pittsburgh Pirates team. Was obviously a reliever in Houston, and it would be an intriguing get. And it is an intriguing get, especially if they can turn him into a back-end rotation starter. But you would also like to see them still add another reliever to this group. And David Bednar, I think, is where this conversation has to begin. Because David Bednar has been an all-star before. He's been a top-end closer in this league before. He's showcased his fastball and, of course, the 12-6 curve and the changeup at elite levels before. This is not a guy that we haven't seen be good before. This is not a guy like some other players that I'll mention later on in the show that hasn't shown that he can be of the caliber of a Major League Baseball player. David Bednar has been an all-star before. He has been one of the better closers in baseball at times in his career so far. And of course, we all have kind of a certain vibe with him and a certain appreciation and love for David Bednar because he is a Pittsburgh kid at heart, and that's why he's called the Renegade. But a nickname only takes you so far, especially after the season that David Bednar had last year. And it was a season that a lot of people will shun on for a good reason. I mean, he just was not very good last year. He had a 5.77 ERA, just 58 strikeouts. The whip was a 1.42, which is not a good year. And it was a season where a lot of us expected that the bullpen was going to be a strength of this team, especially with the acquisition of Aroldis Chapman to really kind of create this three-headed monster in the back end of the bullpen with David Bednar, another player that also needs to return back to form, and Colin Holderman, and of course Aroldis Chapman, who's no longer here and is now in Boston. So you now have Aroldis Chapman, who was arguably your best reliever in 2024, no longer with the team. And then you start to look at Colin Holderman and David Bednar and say, okay, you're our back-end bullpen options. We need you to be successful for this team to be successful, because the Pirates were top 5 in blown saves last year. And we all remember that stretch in August where they lost 9 or 10 games in a row. And pretty much it felt like almost every game was just watching it on repeat with your remote control, just turning the dial back like this. It was like, okay, rewind, because all it was getting good starts out of your starters. Not always, but the majority of the time, the starters were definitely playing up to caliber. Even the offense was scoring runs during that stretch, but not just during that stretch, but all season. There were times where the Pirates looked like they just had a game locked down. David Bednar would come in or Colin Holderman would come in and just completely implode. And you cannot be top 5 in the league in blown saves and expect to have any microcosm of success. It just can't happen. The best teams in baseball are built on strong bullpens that can close out games, because over the course of a 162-game season, you're not going to get 8 innings of work from your starting pitching staff every single game. There are going to be games, and we know this as Pirates fans, where you might even have to just lean on your bullpen entirely to get the job done for you. And the Pirates just couldn't rely on that last year. They had one of the worst bullpens in all of baseball collectively last season. Yes, there were some bright spots in this bullpen, like a Dennis Santana, like a Carmen Mlodzinski, like a Kyle Nicholas. There were some bright spots. And then, of course, you're going to be getting Dauri Moreta back into the mix at some point. He was very good in 2022. Or 2023, my apologies. And then you're also going to get a potential long relief option in Johan Oviedo or Braxton Ashcraft or even a Mike Burrows. So the seeds are there. But more importantly, David Bednar and Colin Holderman absolutely have to be the guys that take a step forward. They have to get back to, for Colin Holderman, for instance, nearly leading the league in the holds category. David Bednar needs to get back at least into the top 10 in saves and bring that ERA way down. Because you look at the seasons that David Bednar has had here, and he's a career 3.36 ERA guy. And a lot of that is inflated from this past season and, of course, his 2020 campaign with San Diego. But before this year, David Bednar did not have an ERA above 3 in Pittsburgh. 2.23, 2.61, and 2.0 on the nose. If he can get back to that, and if we could also see Colin Holderman get back into an elite setup role, I actually won't even say elite. I'll say a good setup role, then this team will be put in place very well. Because I think we all fully expect this starting rotation, which will be the next topic that we talk about with these players. But the starting rotation is going to be among the best in baseball, I think. You have Paul Skeens, you have Mitch Keller, you have Jared Jones. If Bailey Falter can be anything of what he was last year, you have him. You have the idea that Bubba Chandler can eventually debut and be a potential top prospect and Rookie of the Year candidate. You also have the guys that I mentioned before, like Mike Burrows, Braxton Ashcraft, and Johan Oviedo, who are all going to insert themselves into the mix. And this is even before they potentially add a major league starter, like potentially a Caleb Ferguson. So you know, as of right now, on paper, that your starting pitching staff is the biggest strength of your roster. But if it's only the starting pitching staff and not a good bullpen behind it, folks, it's not going to get them very far. And that's just an unfortunate reality, is if Paul Skeens throws 7 scoreless innings, but the bullpen just gives the game away, then it's not going to matter. And that's kind of what we saw last season. And it's one of the biggest points of emphasis going into 2025 is that they have to close out games that they should be winning. Because the record would have just been astronomically better if you cut a quarter of those blown saves out. Not even half. A quarter of those blown saves out. They're an 81-82 win team last year. That's how bad it was. So David Bednar and Colin Holderman absolutely are some of the most important players for this team to succeed because they are the back-end bullpen options. They absolutely have to learn how to close out games again. They have to be consistent in doing so, especially against those teams that I would consider playoff teams like San Diego, like Arizona, like even potentially a San Francisco. And within their own division, they have to beat teams like Milwaukee and Chicago. And of course, the other two teams in their division, Cincinnati and St. Louis, to get to that mountaintop and potentially win the division or get a playoff appearance or just a winning season. But you cannot do it if your bullpen is constantly giving away games, which is why David Bednar, Colin Holderman, and really the entire bullpen is the most important aspect for this team's success, arguably. We'll talk about the offense a little bit and, of course, a starter that I think absolutely has to have a good campaign as well next on Locked On Pirates. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Again, make sure you download the Game Time app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply because, folks, you know I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. One of my favorite memories, of course, was attending Paul Skeen's debut last year because the energy and the excitement were unforgettable. Now, Game Time has made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Game Time Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Recently, I was looking for some Penguin tickets using the Game Time app, and with Game Time Picks, I found amazing deals and could even see the view from my seat before buying. The super deal was particularly impressive, offering great seats at unbeatable prices. Plus, the app's all-in pricing shows you your total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time and download the Game Time app today. Create an account and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off and download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Alrighty, everybody, and welcome back to the Locked On Pirates podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network. After listening to this show this evening, make sure you also make your second listen Locked On MLB with Paul Francis Sullivan, where, of course, he's covering everything you need to know about the MLB Hall of Fame inductions. Of course, free agency still going on. There's some guys like Pete Alonso, Alex Bregman, a lot of big names still available. And of course, there's a lot of time in between now and opening day, but spring training is just around the corner, and Sully will have you all geared up and ready for what's to come in the 2025 MLB season over at Locked On MLB. So the bullpen obviously has to be one of the most important aspects for this team to have success in 2025. But the starting rotation that I mentioned right now is the strength of this team. It is unquestioned the strength of this roster. But even it will have its flaws. And I think that when you're looking at a player who is very important for this team's success, you obviously look at Paul Skeens, absolutely. Yes. Jared Jones, absolutely. But those guys still maturing, still growing into themselves, even though Skeens has obviously done way more. But I want to talk about Mitch Keller for a little bit because Mitch Keller is an interesting player when it comes to this team's success because prior to 2022, Mitch Keller was one of the worst pitchers in baseball, period. He just was. And then he took that step forward in 2022, became the opening day starter the past two seasons, earned an all-star appearance, probably should have had one last year too, and of course got that lengthy contract extension. But what I think is most important with Mitch Keller going into this season and why he's so important is because you don't know what the increase in workload is going to be for a guy like Paul Skeens just yet. I talked about that on the show yesterday. Same goes for Jared Jones. Then you consider that the youngster Bubba Chandler who could come up and you say, okay, yeah, how much is he really going to get to work either? And then you have Bailey Falter, who's not a big innings guy. And then that fifth starter is going to be kind of a question mark throughout the entirety of the season. So Mitch Keller becomes very important because in the first half of the past 2 seasons, Mitch Keller has looked like one of the best pitchers in baseball. I mean, he's had a sub 3.5 ERA or almost nearly a sub 3 ERA in the first half of the past 2 seasons. He was obviously an all-star in 2023, had a case last season before the second half began, but that's where the problems have come, is in the second half of seasons, Mitch Keller has just slowed down the past 2 years. You saw the fastball velocity really take a hit last year. The year prior as well. You start to see the command and the placement of his pitches also kind of start to waver as the season goes down. But when you look at Mitch Keller and you see what kind of player he can be, which is that first half self, and then you consider what's happened in the second half, when you're trying to be a successful team and you want to take that next step, you need a guy like Mitch Keller to remain consistent through the entirety of the year. Now, of course, you can go look at a few starts in that second half that really ballooned his ERA in those final 9 starts where he went 1-8 with like a 5.77 ERA or some crazy number. But throughout it, you could just tell that he just looked different. And you absolutely cannot have that when you have a guy in Paul Skeens who only threw 133 innings last year and is going to expect an uptick in workload, but obviously you're still going to take care of him as an asset. Same goes for Jared Jones. And once you move past that, you say, okay, well, Mitch Keller has been the workhorse of this pitching staff for better or for worse over the past couple of years, and the Pirates absolutely need him to do that again. But he has to remain consistent throughout the entirety of the season. The Pirates cannot afford for Mitch Keller to have a subpar second half again, because although the starting pitching staff is a strength, although they have Paul Skeens, one of the best, if not the best young pitcher that we've seen in over a decade in baseball, and Jared Jones, who's a very good rookie pitcher in his own right going into his second year, and of course, Bubba Chandler. You have all that, but there's no guarantee, one, that all these guys stay healthy. There's no guarantee that they can handle whatever kind of workload the Pirates are going to throw their way. And 3, Mitch Keller is the most proven pitcher on this staff and needs to be treated as such, and he will be. So you're hoping that you, for the majority of the season at least, because no pitcher is perfect, he's not going to have an entire season like his first half of his seasons the last 2 years. But if he can get close to it and just remain consistent and be like a 3.4, 3.5 ERA pitcher, folks, this team's going to reap the benefits. And they're going to be happy with those benefits, especially if Mitch Keller can just really just be consistent. That's all you're really asking for. And it's something that he hasn't really done throughout his career. He's shown glimpses of it, but he hasn't been able to fulfill that throughout his entire career. And I think him doing that would go miles for this team's success. Then you look at the offense and you say, okay, we've talked about the bullpen being up here. The starting pitching staff, I put Mitch Keller up here, but, I expect the starting pitching staff to be the strength. You then look at the offense, which has been the center of attention this entire offseason, because they go and add Spencer Horwitz from the Cleveland Guardians after he was traded from the Toronto Blue Jays, and still kind of waiting on that outfield signing that we're all hoping for. We really hope that we get, because the outfield still needs some work. But the offense already has players in place that need to take steps up, even with those outside signings. You look at a guy like Jack Sawinski, who in 2023 hit over 20 home runs, looked like he was going to become a fulfillment of a strong power hitting left-handed outfielder, which is just a pipe dream in PNC Park with that short right field. And then 2024 was just drastic for him. So if he could even get close to that 2023 form that we saw from Jack Sawinski, folks, that would be amazing for this team. Is there a guarantee that it happens? No, but it would be huge if it could. Then you move to the catcher position, where I think a lot of us expect Joey Bart to be the starting catcher when opening day arrives. I think he's more than earned that with what he did in 2024. But a big question mark behind him, who's the backup catcher? because Henry Davis has failed to meet 1-1 expectations so far. That doesn't mean that he won't ever do it. So don't give up on him right away, because it just might take longer than we expect for him to eventually meet those expectations. But it's still a question. And then you have Endy Rodriguez coming back from injury. I think he'll start the season in AAA while he continues to kind of work back from that UCL surgery. But Henry Davis is a massive part of this too, because with Joey Bart, he had a great offensive season last year, but can you expect him to replicate that? I don't really know. Is it something he can do? Absolutely. But I still think having that backup catcher that can also add some offensive firepower when Joey Bart isn't playing, I think is paramount. And that points directly at a guy like Henry Davis, who the Pirates have invested, obviously, the number 1 pick into, pulled him up very quickly, and have invested a lot of time into him. I mean, I always jokingly say, remember when the biggest problem for Henry Davis was his defense? Yeah, it's not even close to the top of the problems anymore for Henry Davis. But I think he's a massive part of this. Then you look at Ke'Bryan Hayes, who has failed to stay healthy over the past 2 years, but came back in the second half of 2023 and really, really showed us something serious. Like, he looked like he was finally figuring it out with the offense. It finally looked like the bat was going to become a real threat, and then it just didn't happen in 2024. To me, his availability is the biggest thing for Ke'Bryan Hayes, and he's important to this team's success as well. He's a Gold Glove defender, and if he could just hit 250, I think we all walk away happy from that. And then you obviously look at guys like Brian Reynolds and O'Neal Cruz, but you kind of already know what you're going to be getting from those guys. You already know that they're going to be the staples of your offense. But then you look around all at the offense and you say, okay, there's other names that you could throw in there, like a Jared Triolo. It'd be nice with his utility defense to bring a bat along with it as well. Can Isaiah Kiner-Falefa still be an offensive threat like he was last year with Toronto? Not so much in Pittsburgh. I mean, he still had some good points. Can Nick Gonzalez take the next step up? This is all stuff that you have to ask yourself when you're considering how this team can succeed, because they are relying on what is already here. And that is the correct way to do this. You don't just give up on these guys for flyers on veterans that aren't going to be signed for that much. And that's what they're doing right now. And we've discussed why all these players having success is so big for the Pirates' success in 2025, but just why is 2025 so big for the players on the roster and the front office? We'll discuss in a moment. Today's episode is brought to you by SelectQuote. Make sure you go to SelectQuote.com/lockedon today to get started, because in sports, having a winning strategy is absolutely everything. It's how the best teams make it to the Super Bowl, the World Series, and even the Olympics. The same goes for life. Having a strategy like life insurance from SelectQuote can protect your financial legacy and keep your family's future secure. SelectQuote makes it easy to find the perfect life insurance policy. As one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience, they've helped over 2 million customers find $700 billion in coverage since 1985. What sets SelectQuote apart is their personal touch. Unlike other brokers that offer one-size-fits-all policies, their licensed agents tailor coverage to fit your unique needs. So get the right life insurance for you for less at SelectQuote.com/lockedon. Go to SelectQuote.com/lockedon today to get started. That's SelectQuote.com/lockedon. SelectQuote, they shop for your life insurance and you save. And welcome back, everybody, to the final part of today's episode of Locked On Pirates. So all of my loyal third segment listeners, thank you so much for tuning into the show, as you always do. And we've talked all show about important players, and I named a lot of guys because just about everybody on the roster is important for this team's success, because that's just where this team's success needs to lie, is on the field. I know there's a lot of chatter about the off-field stuff and, about Pirates Fest and selling the team and doing all this other stuff. But at the end of the day and at its core, baseball is played on the field. And the results that are on the field are the results that matter. And I even say that about the LA Dodgers right now. With all these players that they're acquiring, you still got to play the games. So in the Pirates case for that, with playing the games, The last 2 years have been exactly the same as far as the record is concerned, which is the most important part of all this, is your record at the end of the season. They've won 76 games the last 2 years. That number absolutely has to increase. A large part of that is going to be coaching. A large part of that is going to be player development and taking steps forward. And a large part of that is just going to be all the other factors that come into an MLB season, like health, like win streaks, like trends, like hot streaks. All of that's going to come into play. But why is 2025 such a crucial year? Well, eventually, when you're adding talent like Paul Skeens and Jared Jones, and eventually a Bubba Chandler, and eventually a Termarr Johnson, and you have talent on the roster like Brian Reynolds, who's under contract for a long time, and O'Neal Cruz, who's one of the most electric players in baseball. And then you look around and you see, okay, they go and sort of fix the first base problem, hopefully, with Spencer Horwitz. And then you have second basemen like Nick Gonzalez and Jared Triolo who can make an impact on this roster. And then you have a Gold Glove winner in Key Brian Hayes. Excuse me. And a newcomer last year like Joey Bart. And then you have a bullpen that has the potential to be good. And a starting rotation that could be argued as a top 5 unit in the National League. You have all this stuff. And I know it sounds like I'm overly positive about it. I get that. That's me. I'm always going to be that way. But at some point, you have to reap the benefits of the talent that you have on your roster. And that goes back to coaching. That goes back to, again, player development. All of this has to eventually piece together like a puzzle. Right now, the puzzle pieces are scattered all over the place. It is the team's duty to put the coaching puzzle piece together with the player development and the lineups and all the other factors that go into an MLB season. Because if 2025 fails to meet expectations, Ben Cherington in all likelihood will be gone. Derek Shelton in all likelihood will be gone. Because at its core, that is where the blame will be placed. Because the players, albeit they are accountable for some of this too, you're not getting rid of Paul Skeens. You're not getting rid of Jared Jones. You might get rid of Mitch Keller. I know Jared Jones and Mitch Keller were in trade talks, but at this point, I don't think they're getting moved. But you're not getting rid of O'Neal Cruz or Brian Reynolds. You have no reason to get rid of Nick Gonzalez. I mean, you're not going to get rid of these players. It's not how they're going to operate, because you're not going to hit a full reset, because then you'll just completely lose the fan base altogether. And we've seen it already kind of happen in the division with the Cincinnati Reds, who went out and got Terry Francona to be their manager because David Bell just wasn't getting it done with a young roster that looks like it has a ton of upside. The Pirates seem to be in the same position. They have a young roster with a ton of upside that can compete in this division because, as I continue to say on this show, and I know people make fun of me for it, but I will continue to say it, this is a very winnable division in 2025, like it was last year. Yeah, the Brewers have been the class of the division. Yes, the Brewers continue to master player development and somehow move on from guys and still continue to be good, but that's just their formula. The Pirates have to stick to their formula. And if it works, it works. But if it doesn't, changes are going to happen. Because truthfully, I'm shocked they already didn't. But I think 2025 is the year where it's put up or shut up time for this team to eventually exceed expectations. Because my expectations, like I said on the show a couple weeks ago, are 82 to 84 wins. I just want a winning record. If you can get 82 or more wins, I think I walk out of this season happy, playoffs or not. But at some point, they have to exceed those expectations. And that's why 2025 is such a big year. And tomorrow, folks, or actually not tomorrow, Monday, we're going to actually be talking with Jeff Carr and Stephen Offenbaker of Locked On Red, some of your favorite people. Hopefully you heard the sarcasm there, about why the Pirates and the Reds are so damn similar. We're going to be talking about that on Monday. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about something else, though. So make sure you tune in on YouTube and all of your favorite audio platforms, because this show is free and available for you on those platforms. So make sure you listen to it. On top of that, make sure you follow me on Twitter at MVP_Ethan or at Locked On Pirates for all of your news, analysis, opinions, and reactions to everything going on in the world of the Pittsburgh Pirates. Again, folks, my name is Ethan Smith. Have a wonderful rest of your Thursday evening. We'll see you tomorrow. But until then, we'll see you on the flip side.